There is a particular kind of person who has spent most of their life being told, in one way or another, that something is wrong with them. Not in those exact words. It comes through in the silences after they speak too honestly, in the discomfort of others, when the conversation accidentally becomes real, in the exhaustion that follows every social encounter, as though they had just run a calculation no one else in the room was even aware of. They leave gatherings early. They need days to recover from conversations that lasted an hour. They notice things nobody asked them to notice, and they carry the weight of what they see long after everyone else has moved on. The common interpretation of this profile is that it represents damage, a nervous system that never healed correctly, emotional circuitry that got scrambled under pressure and now fires too much, too fast, too deep. That interpretation is wrong. Not partially wrong, structurally wrong. And the script that runs on top of that error costs these individuals years of misallocated energy. What actually happened was not a malfunction. What happened was an adaptation. When a system is placed under sustained, high-intensity pressure during its formative period, it does not simply break, it reconfigures. It builds redundancies where single points of failure prove dangerous. It sharpens detection thresholds that most systems never need to develop because most systems were never tested at that level. The human nervous system is not exempt from this logic. A person who grew up inside an environment where subtle cues determined safety, where a tone of voice, a slight change in posture, or an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere of a room could signal what was coming next. That person did not emerge broken. They emerged calibrated. Their system learned to read layers of reality that most people never access because most people were never given the operational necessity to do so. The cost was significant. The output is rare. Hypervigilance is the word clinicians use for this. They place it in the column of symptoms, which is technically accurate in the same way that calling a scalpel dangerous is technically accurate. The precision of the instrument does not disappear because it can also cut. What the trauma-born empath loner carries is a sensory architecture capable of processing micro-expressions, tonal inconsistencies, emotional subtext, and behavioral patterns with a speed and depth that operates largely beneath conscious awareness. They do not decide to read the room. They cannot stop reading it. Every interaction arrives with its full weight of information. What was said, what was withheld, what the body communicated while the mouth said something else, what the pattern of the last 5 exchanges implies about what will happen next. This is not sensitivity as frailty. This is processing power running at a level most people will never reach and never need to. The isolation makes sense once you understand the processing cost. For this profile, an average social environment is not neutral. It is loud in ways that have nothing to do with volume. It demands constant parallel processing, the surface conversation and the subtextual analysis running simultaneously, the emotional data being received and filtered and stored even when the individual wants nothing more than to simply be present without calculating. The decision to withdraw is not a social failure, it is resource management. A high-performance system that refuses to run low-value software is not malfunctioning. It is operating with a logic that the external world will rarely validate, because the external world built its standards around a different kind of system entirely. The loner does not retreat from life. They retreat from noise. The distinction matters, even when no one around them is capable of making it. What separates the 1% is not what they carry, it is what they build with it. The 99% who do not survive this, and survival here is not a dramatic term, it is simply the failure to integrate. They get caught in the loop. The weight of perception without direction becomes ruminative. The mind that was built to detect patterns turns inward and begins running the same analysis over and over on experiences that cannot be resolved, only carried. The engine operates at full capacity with nowhere to go. It consumes itself. This is the version of the trauma-born empath that the world tends to see, the one that confirms the original misdiagnosis, the one that appears to be evidence that the sensitivity itself is the problem. It is not. The problem is the absence of structure. The problem is a motor without a chassis. The 1% found the chassis, or built it, usually both. What transmutation looks like in practice is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is the moment when the pattern recognition that once scanned every room for threat begins, instead, to scan for signal, for the variable that others missed, for the decision point that has not yet surfaced. The same capacity that once made crowds unbearable becomes the thing that makes a negotiation readable before the other party has revealed their position. The same depth of processing that made superficial relationships feel like suffocation becomes the foundation for the rare, high-fidelity connection. The kind where nothing needs to be explained twice, and the subtext is shared language rather than hidden burden. The same hyper-awareness that once felt like a curse on ordinary days becomes a competitive instrument in the moments that actually matter. The word beware in this context is not addressed inward, it is addressed outward. Because the person who emerges from this process, the one who stopped trying to resolve the past and started deploying the instrument that the past forged, that person cannot be managed through the dynamics that work on most people. Flattery does not land as flattery. It lands as data. Manipulation requires that the target fail to see the structure underneath the behavior, and this individual sees structure as a reflex. Social performance reads as performance. Inconsistency between stated motive and actual behavior is not a mystery. It is immediately visible, filed, and quietly factored into every subsequent calculation. The person who carries this kind of perceptual architecture and has learned to anchor it in discipline, in physical routine, in project and craft, in the deliberate construction of a life that does not require external validation to hold its shape, that person is not easily reached by the ordinary tools of social influence. They are not unreachable. They are simply operating on a different frequency, one that requires honesty to access. The framework is not complicated. Stop directing the instrument at the wound. Stop trying to use perception to finally understand what happened, as though understanding it fully will change the weight of it. The wound has already done its work. What it produced is already here. The only relevant question now is where it gets aimed. Physical discipline is not optional for this profile, not as punishment, not as performance, but because the nervous system that runs this hot requires a chassis that can contain it. Routine is not rigidity, it is the structure that keeps the engine from consuming itself between deployments. Observation redirected from threat to opportunity is not optimism, it is the same mechanism, recalibrated toward use rather than defense. What remains after this recalibration is not a recovered person. Recovery implies a return to a prior state. There is no prior state worth returning to. What remains is something that was not there before the pressure, before the adaptation, before the long and largely unwitnessed process of building a self that the original environment never intended to produce. What remains is someone who cannot be easily read because they have already read everything first. Someone who does not perform stability because the stability is structural. Someone who chose, at some point without ceremony, to stop treating their own architecture as a liability. The weight does not disappear. It becomes the thing they lift with.